So Brian, I'm really curious about how the COVID-19 pandemic has really impacted your clients' responses that you've seen when you've been out, and have they had to do things differently during these recent weather events that we've had already so far in the United States? And if that's what you've seen, can you give us some real life examples so our listeners can learn from them?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Regina. Nice job on the presentation.
Thank you.
So, we talked a couple months ago. Everbridge pushed out a presentation, and I was speaking with Director Moskowitz from the Florida Department of Emergency Management. And this was an actual conversation we talked about, which was getting ready for hurricane season during a pandemic. Some of the things that the Division of Emergency Management was trying to handle. Some of the big topics we talked about and we covered, and I've seen not only in Florida, but I've talked to a lot of our customers across the country. Sheltering was a huge concern. How are we going to shelter people in a pandemic? What are we going to do with the spacing requirements? How are we going to handle social distancing? It's going to severely impact the amount of people we can shelter in a specific location. And as you mentioned earlier, how is that going to be handled when people are afraid to go to shelters now? Especially the elderly people, especially people who are more susceptible to the virus. The state of Florida, as well as many other locations, have talked about renting out hotels, using hotel rooms as a easier way to social distance people. So that's definitely something that's been on the table. But getting the PPE, in the beginning of this pandemic, we talked and we heard so much about the shortage of PPE and where and when that PPE was going to be available. So a lot of customers have been going out and purchasing masks and gowns and gloves and face shields and all the appropriate PPE to be able to handle any type of evacuation, whether that's from a wildfire. We've been hearing a lot lately of earthquakes, more and more popping up, as well as hurricanes that have been impacting the East Coast and the one that impacted Hawaii not too long ago. So those are really some of the big concerns. We've been working on a lot of the different return to work initiatives and how those are impacting through COVID-19. Most people look at Everbridge as a mass notification system and really only notifying the public, especially our government customers. What a lot of people don't understand is we pushed out a major COVID-19 shield package back earlier this spring and continuing through the fall. And recently we pushed out a contact tracing initiative for some of our higher education customers who have been grabbing this up like crazy due to the kids coming back to school soon and being able to understand who's been in contact with people. And for us, with our system, as everybody knows, and you've seen, privacy is of utmost concern for us, and we're always making sure we respect everybody's privacy. But these are really some of the big topics we've been handling throughout the pandemic. Everbridge has been very active. We remain dedicated to our customers and how not only they deal with the pandemic response, but also how they're going to deal with severe weather season throughout this problem we're having.
That's great. That's great. One of the things that you mentioned that I'm really curious about, since organizations are increasingly turning to technology given the pandemic, what are some of the new things that you're doing to help agencies protect residents and their employees? And the one that I heard maybe perked up my ears because I didn't know you guys were doing that, when that was the area of contact tracing.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time earlier this spring really trying to understand. Apple, Google came out with kind of a footprint for how contact tracing should work. We kind of came out with our own proprietary part of that, which is to understand human behavior. So proximity alerting, understanding when you may be too close to somebody. Also, so our contact tracing solution really works off of our native app and our native safety connection solution, which has been used for years on keeping employees safe. So what this does is it's transmitting a key. So every day your phone emits a new key to everybody it comes within a 6-foot radius of, or within a certain radius if you want it to be a little larger than that. So you're exchanging this key with each other's phone. Now, to you and I, we never see it. We don't know anything about it. We don't have access to that key. We don't know who that key came from. But in the background, our phones are exchanging these keys. And if I go and I get tested and I test positive, I can then go into my app and I can state that, hey, I tested positive. I'm letting my employer know, or I'm letting a government agency know that I've tested positive. Once that happens, the system then goes back 14 days and it
Oh,
notifies anybody who has that key from your phone that they were around somebody who has since tested positive. Now, again, privacy being the utmost concern, we're
true.
not passing anyone's information. We're not saying, hey, Brian, you and Regina were hanging out at the bar last week and, right? That's absolutely not going to happen. So it's just respecting privacy. It's letting you know that you were around somebody in the past 14 days, and we'll even lower it down and say, maybe 2 weeks or 10 days ago, you tested positive. And you kind of see that in the upper right-hand corner of the slide with our return to work strategy. We're also focused a lot on manual contact tracing. A lot of governments don't want to turn to an app because, A, of some privacy concerns, but B, just the lack of people wanting to download an app, and just the public behavior around that. So we've also set up through our crisis management solution, we have set up a manual contact tracing where you can bring in the information from your testing locations for those people who are tested positive. You can import that into our system. You can send out a survey to a person who tested positive to get a better understanding if they're experiencing symptoms. There's a symptom checker that they can be sent. There's a whole bunch of different surveys where, something that we haven't done before, which is when you answer a question, based on that answer, you'll get a different question to answer at that point, right? So it's more of an interactive survey. So it's a great solution. From there, you can then set up a time to talk with that person, kind of interview them, get an understanding of who else they've been around, so that you can then go and complete that entire tracing back that 14 days. So another big initiative that we undertook in the spring, and we've successfully rolled that out over the summer, and it's being used by a lot of customers today. And our higher education field is really taking off with this initiative as well to protect kids as they come back to school.
That's great. So what about from the area of evacuations, and the pandemic in particular, but evacuations, how would some of the technology that you guys provide be helpful in assisting an emergency manager in evacuation assistance?
Sure. So we've taken on a public warning initiative. So in the US, most of us are aware of iPause and how that works, right? But in our international customer base, we have a location-based alerting system, something that we're bringing to the US hopefully soon. That's one of my big initiatives I'm working on right now. But our Everbridge public warning, if you see in the upper left-hand corner, so you'll see that polygon, that orange polygon with all the purple circles inside it and the numbers inside it. So what that's telling you as the emergency official is that's the total number of people inside that polygon who are attached to cell phone towers at this time. So we're giving you the ability to understand exactly who or how many people you can physically reach at this time with a push notification or an SMS text message. Additionally to that, though, we're telling you their nationalities based off their SIM cards. Right.
Wow.
So it gives you the ability now to know, number one, how many people may be from outside the US, or how many people may be here from different areas of the world. And then what languages will they need to get that information in to make sense to them. Right. So it's really a lot of intelligent information to allow them to triage and send out better messages. Now, Norway just recently used this system to send messages to people in Spain who were there from Norway. So yeah, so they were able to literally draw their polygon and see how many subscribers to cell towers in Spain were from Norway. And they were able to target just the people from Norway with the alert to let them know that they've recently changed and updated their protocols on returning back to Norway and that they would have to self-isolate for 14 days.
Wow.
Absolute fantastic use case. I'm seeing a lot of this great potential for disaster response, knowing are there still people in evacuation zones, post-disaster response, can you focus your emergency responders in specific areas based on active cell phones that are in that area? Missing children, being able to, get in touch with the people who are in that area. But what's what's really interesting about this is this has the ability to go back in time, right? So
Mm.
we can go up to 14 days back and notify people who are in an area 6 hours ago when a child may have been abducted, 2 weeks ago because we had a major outbreak of COVID in that area. So we want to notify people who are in that area, that this was the epicenter for a major outbreak and you should be tested or you should isolate for the next 2 weeks. So our public warning system that we're unveiling shortly across the globe is really going to provide a lot more powerful analytics and a lot more use capabilities to emergency responders and emergency management.
So that means that if I'm hearing you correctly, then Brian, that means that if an emergency manager was trying to issue very specific instructions about what shelters might be open or how people should proceed, that if they actually were able to draw that little drawing and isolate people and find out where they are, they could actually then push out very specific messaging. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And because this isn't CAC compliant, it certainly can be, but because it's not focused on that, there's not going to be a 360 character or a 90 character cutoff. You're going to be able to put in the information you need to put in. It's non-invasive on their phone, so it's not going to be this really blaring noise and all this other type of stuff. So it's going to be a more powerful tool to be able to do any type of public warning. Now, because of that, you don't need to have this whole opt-in database. You don't need to have all this other information, right? You can simply rely on everybody whose phone is active in that area at that time.
I could just see that would be so helpful in the area of both hurricanes, but also wildfires when you're trying to direct people to certain locations. If you had that kind of detailed information, it could be super powerful.
Yeah, I look at this tool really, around all of these fast moving type of disasters. So, certainly tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires, hurricanes and that type of nature where things may shift, unexpectedly or, some just in time information. So I look at this tool as something that's going to be extremely helpful and beneficial going forward. We're going to pair this with some cell broadcast technology. So, you will be able to have that instant, immediate notification. You're not going to have to worry about the cell congestion and things of that nature. So we look at this as a pretty big up and coming tool that will be useful across the world.
That's very, very cool. Thank you. There's one more thing I wanted to ask you because we have just a few more minutes. And when I was talking in my presentation, I talked about the need to be ready to adapt your plans. How are you helping emergency managers with adaptability during an emergency?
Yeah, great question. So our crisis management tool, and I don't know what happened to the image in the bottom right-hand corner. It's either dropped everything.
Having a crisis.
So talk about adapting. So our crisis management tool has been allowing just that. We've worked with several government agencies recently who said, we've got these very key plans that we've been having to change quite frequently. We're looking for a tool that can keep kind of an online catalog, but also initiate a checklist to our response teams. Since so many of them are working from home now, a lot of EOCs have gone remote. At least to some extent, it's not being fully staffed. We saw several EOCs across the state of Florida when the hurricane was approaching, where they were talking about going from a couple hundred employees down to just maybe a dozen or so employees. So this tool has really allowed them to not only keep plans, policies, procedures up to date in an online library, so to speak, but also be able to push out specific checklists that they wanted to be done, watch that being done in real time, seeing those responses come back. You see in some of those pie charts. Now this can be done for things like damage assessment, shelter management. How many people are in the shelter at this point? Are you reaching capacity? So being able to adapt to some of these different changes that we're experiencing overall and being able to see that in real time in the system, as we're building it out for them. So we've done a lot of that adaptability recently.